Welcome to the Ignite podcast, where we share thought-provoking dialogue, actionable insights from the dynamic world of startups. Today, I'm super delighted to have Darragh McKay here from NoLoco. And Darragh, why don't you give the audience a quick intro about yourself, and we can dive in.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Ryan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of NoLoco. NoLoco is a no-code platform that instantly turns business data into business apps for your team and customers. I have a software engineering background. Recently kind of transitioned into the role of CEO, which I'm sure Brian's going to unpack in the next few minutes.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll leave it there.
That's great. So unpack that journey, right? So, in fair disclosure, you're a Team Ignite portfolio company, and when we invested,
I am.
there were a couple co-founders in your company, and then
That's right.
and now there's just you.
Just me.
Unpack that story a little bit. That journey from being an engineer to founding the company to getting thrust into the CEO spot, which is not what you expected.
No, it's really not. It's not what you think you're going to get into. I think speaking on behalf of probably most engineers, it's a love of the kind of craft as well. So you almost never want to give it up. So to kind of have to give it up so soon or so suddenly, just a few months ago, is definitely been an interesting transition for myself. But yeah, like it started NoLoco close to 3 years ago now. Again, it was over COVID, where I just had like a lot of spare time, and like I mentioned, engineers kind of do what engineers do best and just kind of mess around with some ideas, mess around with some code. It's never the right way to start a company. I'll advocate for that. But that's sort of where it happened. But thankfully, I did have a good friend of mine, Simon, who was always interested in kind of starting startups as well. So we were kind of ideating and just basically caught up once a week during COVID, where nobody could go outside, and started thinking about different ideas and problems that we were seeing in the industry and in our experience in different tech startups and kind of scale ups. Eventually settled on the idea of building applications without code, building software for teams and businesses without code. Obviously, we were surrounded by product engineers day in, day out, but my co-founder at the time was non-technical. And he really saw the benefits of being able to apply his technical mindset to producing applications that were logical, but not like actually written in code. And that's where we ultimately ended up.
So that's interesting. So walk me through that journey of, so you're sitting there in COVID, and you and Simon, I guess you guys are friends before all of this.
That's right. Yeah, we met in university, actually, in the entrepreneurial society, actually. So it was kind of meant to be in that regard. We're always going to... all we ever did was talk startups when we did meet up.
So you guys are sitting in, this is Trinity College?
Yeah. That's it.
Okay, it's
Yeah.
Trinity College in Dublin. And you're both engineers, or just you?
Just me. Yeah, just me. Simon had a product background. He kind of worked in as product manager for TripAdvisor, Revolut, some big companies in London.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about the Dublin startup scene when we get to it. But let's unpack the NoLoco experience. So you guys are sitting around talking about startups. What was so interesting about startups? As a college student. I mean, I went to college during the first .com boom. I'm kind of dating myself here, right? Late 90s, early 2000s. But I didn't get drawn into it at that time. Really, I knew it was going on, but how does that happen? How does a college student kind of look around and go, gosh, we need to get into this startup thing?
Yeah, Dublin is kind of an exception, I think, in some larger Europe anyway, that there is an incredible startup ecosystem, and it actually is kind of fostered within university. Like I said, we did meet in the Entrepreneurial Society, which is effectively the startup society at this point. But, from my end, it was really just from the love of solving problems. Generally speaking, solving problems with code, but the idea of being able to solve a problem to someone and ultimately sell them that solution. I'm the total cliche. I was never ever good at the selling the solution part, just the solving the problem part. So that's where I kind of I knew I needed to get to know people like Simon and anyone else who was good at the commercial side of building a business to, yeah, really just lean on them to do the parts of the business that I wasn't good at the time.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
don't know
makes sense.
why I ended up being so drawn into it really beyond that, but it really was just that like common interest between people looking to solve problems and challenge themselves, I guess.
Yeah. Walk me through the would love to hear about the Y Combinator application, how you guys decided to apply,
Yeah.
getting in, what that experience was like coming out.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, probably like a lot of startups that do get into YC, we didn't get in our first application actually.
No?
We applied pretty early on, which I would encourage anyone to do. Very early, where we were no more than an idea, and at the time it feels like everything to you, but it's a really good process actually of going through the YC application. It just asks you very simple questions about your business, but if you are struggling to answer them, it kind of shines a light on yourself more than anything else, and it kind of makes you go, oh, I don't have the answer to this. So we went through the application, answered the tough questions, and we eventually got that gut wrenching email that we didn't get in, and it was no surprise. We didn't have any MRR. We did have a product, but we were kind of a few weeks away from kind of getting it to market yet. And I think that's one thing they look at. They look at teams who can kind of launch early. But what we took from that was that, the applications to apply for the next batch would be open again in about 3 months, which gave us 3 to 4 months to really turn this around, get some customers, get it to market, and just build on the feedback they provided to us. So yeah, that's exactly what we did. We kind of, within a few weeks, indeed, we actually got some revenue, which was just such a driving factor for us. It felt like everything at the time, and it felt like, oh
Yeah.
man, if we were only a few weeks later, we would have got in. But it didn't matter. What really mattered is that we were starting to get revenue, and that we had proven that at least one person in the world wanted what we were building, and we knew we could
Right.
build from there. And again, just spent the next 6 months doing that, learning from the people we were talking to, and doing our best to kind of settle into the market. And of course, adjusting the application. I think if we'd looked at the two applications, they were probably considerably different.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I would echo that sentiment, right? I mean, you're not really, I mean, you're kind of just noodling along on a project until you actually get revenue. When you have revenue, now you're a company.
Yeah.
Somebody's actually paid you to solve their problems. Like, yes, I need this and I will pay you for it. And that's great. Yeah. And now,
and in fact, we weren't a company, but when the first time we applied, we were just a project,
Right.
The second time around, we registered for his business in Ireland, then eventually Delaware, and it became a real thing. Absolutely.
So you go through the program, you have a successful raise, as one does, coming out of YC. This is 2021, 22, somewhere in there.
Yeah, exactly that.
So yeah, things are still pretty frothy out there in the market. It's pretty easy to raise as a YC company.
It was.
Not as easy now. Still easier than most, but not as, and I think we syndicated your deal back then.
That's right. Yeah.
Which was easier back then than it is now. It's quite tough to syndicate deals right now. And then so you're plugging along, and then Simon says, "This isn't for me anymore," and you're like, "What? Tell me how what that experience was like."
Yeah, I mean, so we're in October now. This happened back in June. Oh, sorry, this happened back in May, really. That he kind of eventually told me that he no longer wanted to do it. But I'd be lying if I didn't say the writing was on the walls for at least a month or two before that. Startups are tough. Like, yeah. I don't. Me and Simon, we still get on.
You don't wish them upon your enemies.
yeah. Like it's really tough. So and it's not saying it's not for everyone, but in many cases it's not. I'm preaching to the choir here, most certainly. But all the same, that's really just the reason that happened. There was no kind of falling out, which I'm really, really glad for. But at the end of the day, he decided he wanted to move on to do something different. Which is good for him. But it obviously left me trying to figure out what I needed to do.
Thrust you into the solo founder. Yeah,
exactly.
Which is even harder. Yeah.
I was always confident. The minute he told me, I didn't overreact. I didn't really react at all. Actually, it was just a lot of processing. But I knew that because I'd spent the last 18 months building a really incredible team around me. Like we're a small team. There's only 6 of us now, but at the same time, I back my team wholeheartedly. We've got engineers who've been with us for 18 months. They know what they're doing. They don't need a at this stage, they don't need a CTO to kind of handhold them through problem solving. They know what they're doing, sort of thing. So
Yeah.
I had no doubt in my mind that I'd be able to kind of take the helm.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's a big reason that I tend to not back solo founders, right? Because
Yeah,
I know how hard this is. I failed at it. I've seen lots of founders fail at it, and it's too easy for the solo founder to just go, "It's too hard," or "I'm not getting traction," or
yeah. Oh,
maybe I won't do
believe
this. Um, especially if between where you guys were and where you are now, that's
me.
like you have a viable product with revenue, a little less likely to fail now, right? You just have to get your keep growing and all that stuff. And but a solo founder to take something from 0 to 1 is just, and then 1 to 10, that's really really tough and really 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 rare. And it's also common, and I've seen this multiple times in my portfolio, where one founder out of 2 or 3 decides like, hey, this isn't for me, you know and if you have a solo founder situation, then the company shuts down, right? Returns capital, and that's not good for the investors or the customers or anybody. So at least with 2 co-founders, you can kind of keep going, right?
Absolutely, yeah. For me, there was never a doubt in my mind that we would keep going. That it was, I was so excited about I'm still so excited, sorry, about the opportunity that what we're doing, and the team are still so confident, which is the most important thing in my mind.
Yeah.
You don't want the team to be kind of losing, losing steam. So yeah, like it took a few days to process, but it actually really energized me at the end of the day. I got really excited about the opportunity to kind of move into that role, get more control over the processes, take a hard look at what wasn't working, and kind of realize that it was now or never. We needed to do
Yeah.
this now or never. And it kind of gave me that kick that we needed.
Yeah,
It's
that's
not the
great.
path I would advocate for, but it worked for us. It's working for us, we'll say.
Let's talk about the generative AI. I mean, you obviously started this company before ChatGPT burst on the scene a year ago.
Mhm.
NoLoco and low code, no code kind of platforms were all the rage back when you started this company, right? People needed this kind of stuff to plug into their databases, and
Yep.
you got Power Platform and things like that. And how does the generative AI um, platform as it is change how you would look at this business and how you move forward?
Yeah, no, it's a topic that's hard to avoid, but no, I'm actually really excited about the opportunity that generative AI represents in the no-code space. So if you step back from what we're doing, we're ultimately lowering the barrier to entry for people to build software, people to build tools, people to optimize their day to day. And realistically, that's the main opportunity that AI has presented as well. And that doesn't mean it's going to remove our opportunity. It actually means it's going to give it superpowers, really. So the biggest challenge I face in developing NoLoco is bridging that technical gap, right? We're always trying to lower the barrier to make it as easy as possible for non-technical people to build tooling for themselves and for their customers. But at the end of the day, it's still a little technical. You still need to understand how your data. You still need to understand how that data connects to itself. Whether you've got projects and tasks and clients, how all that interlinks and how to best structure that. And what we've found is that AI is able to just bridge that gap so effectively, right? You're able to use natural language to describe the problem you're trying to solve, and then AI is able to kind of effectively bridge any technical gap that they previously had. So didn't take us too long to start implementing this into our product, which was really, really impressive how little effort it took us to really roll it in.
Mm.
So NoLoco connects to several different data sources, Airtable, Google Sheets, but most interestingly for this, Postgres and MySQL also. So we already had code that effectively syncs MySQL data into NoLoco tables, and then from there we build an app based on your NoLoco tables. What we were able to do then within just a few days was ask people to provide a prompt for the type of app that they're looking to build. We would then ask OpenAI to produce MySQL tables to describe that app, because OpenAI's ChatGPT model is incredibly familiar with MySQL or any type of SQL tables.
Right.
So instead of training it on something super bespoke to what we're doing, we just asked it to generate really common MySQL tables. And then from there, we translate those MySQL tables into something that our infrastructure already understood. And from there, we were able to hand it over to a different AI to build the basic version of the app. So we also then ask it to do things like, well, examine the table name and the columns in these tables and suggest a layout that people might start from. So it'll spit out things like calendars if it sees things a start and an end date, or a Kanban board if it sees things like status fields. And we could have written a whole bunch of if statements to solve that, but this is far more effective, far quicker, and we were able to build this in just a few hours in that case.
Yeah, and I think about like a platform like yours as kind of the last mile, right? You have this Chat GPT platform, OpenAI service, or you got Llama 70 billion parameter model, or whatever it is. These foundational models that can translate and accelerate what a low code platform, no code platform does, but you still need to have some sort of user interface and system of record and way of managing all these connections and interactivities and the UI, right?
Exactly. The AI is never going to get it exactly perfect, and you can, in stepping away from like no code, you can see this in other industries. Like DALL-E is incredibly effective at generating DALL-E, and Midjourney are incredibly effective at generating images, but if it's not the exact image you want, it's quite difficult to edit it and stuff. So Adobe took the that same principle and said, all you need to do is select an area of your image to describe what you want. They implemented generative fill, and all of a sudden you're applying AI on top of the entire Adobe Photoshop ecosystem, and that's clearly more powerful than a standalone tool that just generates a single image
for a Discord chat.
Yeah, right. I don't know. I mean, there's incredible value in it.
Right, it's super neat, but it's kind of
applying it to these established platforms. I see that's the huge value.
Right, it's an accelerant. This is why, in thinking about investing in AI, I'm kind of looking at those fully integrated vertical kind of platforms. It's not just AI layered on top of something, but it's the whole product, right? Which I think you guys are
absolutely
well positioned to do, because you have this product that started as a no code, low code platform, and now you layer in AI and it just accelerates it and makes the user experience even better.
Absolutely. And even from like a support perspective, it's not something we've experimented with too much. I've spent maybe like a day experimenting with support, but we get a huge amount of questions that could be answered by our support guides, but more often than not, the answer absolutely depends on the context of what they're trying to do, the context of their app, their data. And I think in the near future, when we have the time, we'll be able to build a chatbot even to just kind of answer people's questions, even if it's not outputting anything in terms of doing something for them, but just even answer very specific questions built on top of our guides.
That's the problem with a lot of these tools, right? Is just knowing what all the buttons and knobs do. Like when I started this podcast, somebody was like, "Oh yeah, you got to use Adobe Premiere Pro." So I download that. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this thing is so complex. There's all these buttons and widgets and things, and it's going to take me dozens of hours to learn how to use this tool." Versus I use Riverside to record this. It's very simple. I just have to go back and edit a few things in the cloud, and it just exports it perfectly, and I don't have to worry about it. So there's like kind of you think of Riverside as my low code podcast editing
absolutely
platform versus something like Adobe Premiere Pro, which is like very complex, like for the power user.
That's exactly it. Like, and at the end of the day, if you're trying to build what you've brought up draws big similarities between what I see in the no code industry. I think it's an incredible industry, but a lot of people are mistakenly trying to apply no code to producing new things, producing products, producing SaaS companies. And I think that day will come. But right now, it's incredibly beneficial for producing things where you're not trying to differentiate. And I'm not saying your product's not trying to your podcast not trying to differentiate, but ultimately you're trying to build a podcast of similar quality to everyone else, or perhaps better. But if you're
not on this podcast,
like Adobe, if you want to use
minimal
Adobe
quality
Premiere Pro, you'll definitely need to use that to if you're producing a song from scratch, for example,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
that's where you need to
Yeah.
start differentiating. That's where, you know, the cloud-based podcast recording isn't going to do as good a job.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Tell me about how you guard against and differentiate against the bundle of Microsoft, right? You have all these E3, E5 licenses out there. They're like, oh yeah, like Power Platform. That's included in what you're already paying for. Why would you go pay for NoLoco? Like, how do you guard against the Microsoft juggernaut?
It's a great question.
The Mick bundle is what you might call it.
Yeah, that's a great term. No, it's a good question, but it's a funny one. I don't have a good answer, but you know, I think because it's so incredibly bundled, it's almost like that whole ecosystem isn't looking to move too far away from the Power BI platform. And you know, Power BI has similar automations and similar complexities. You know, they're kind of doing their own thing over in the corner, and it's almost like nobody's looking over the wall garden to see what they're missing out on. You know, really, we should be looking to kind of say, how can we, you know, break in, or how can we kind of target that market? But the reality as well is that the market is so big. Ultimately, the overall TAM is just any SMB that has data, which is effectively any SMB in the world. That's not where we're starting, but that's the eventual who we can address. And you know, Microsoft, they have a large chunk of those, largely in the larger side. But yeah, I don't have a great answer to that, unfortunately.
That's a good answer. I think the way I would answer it if I was on the hot seat is I'd say something like, you know, we're just going to listen to our customers and keep building exactly what they need to solve their pain points better than Microsoft can generally, you know.
That's what we are doing, but nobody's asking for like Microsoft support. We don't actually support Microsoft Office as an integration, and it's because I think I've been asked for it like twice, and I don't know why, because we integrate with Google Sheets, but we just don't see anyone coming from the Microsoft sphere.
I guess Airtable will be another integration.
Yeah, that's the main one we partner with.
Yeah,
which is for those that don't know, it's a spreadsheet interface on like database. It's a very powerful database. It looks like a spreadsheet. So a lot of businesses power their whole business on top of Airtable. Yeah.
So tell me about your early career, becoming a front end developer. You know, moving into a full stack developer. How did you get interested in coding?
Yeah, again, like a lot of developers, I picked it up when I was still a teenager, and building basically websites for myself for any idea that I ever thought of, or maybe my friends and things like that. And so, yeah, I could have learned HTML, CSS, JavaScript back when HTML5 was kind of just being announced. So I spent all of my time learning how to improve those skills. And I think for a while I plateaued, truthfully. I didn't really know what I was doing. But again, I was just solving scratching my own itch, realistically, and producing websites. Nothing too complicated. It was when I got to university that my accounting teacher from secondary school it's actually a great story. My accounting teacher from secondary school messaged me on Twitter after I finished secondary school, or high school, sorry, as it would be known in America. And he knew I was a bit of a nerd, or one of the better ones at at computers. Basically, that's all he knew. But his brother was looking for a website, basically, for his new business. That was a way to. He was hosting 5K runs every week, and he wanted to be able to post those and post the results. And he put me in touch, and I said, "Sure, I can do that." I didn't know how to do it, but I said I'd figure it out as we went, and I charged him only a couple €100, I think, for probably a few months' work.
Oh, wow.
It really, I learned so much. And then, of course, that he was really happy with the results because it was dirt cheap. And, you know, I basically continued working with him for like 2 or 3 years, I believe. And I actually never even met him. It was all over like phone calls. And I've worked with him for like 2 or 3 weeks. I eventually started charging more, or 2 or 3 years, sorry. But through that and all the other things I did on the side, it was just really a matter of picking projects and expanding the scope of those projects. The scope of that grew huge over time. It turned out to be a whole place where you could register for races, you could do payments through it, you could upload the race, you had profiles, you could track your best times, you could get badges. It was really incredible, and that's kind of where I started.
Wow.
So I eventually chose
more than just a
computer
website. That's like
engineering.
Web 2.0.
Oh,
You got to
yeah,
like,
it was.
get all the data, store the data, retrieve the data. Like, it was much more complex than just like, here's our stuff.
Absolutely, and I did not know what I was doing. I basically reinvented foreign keys in databases in my head. If anyone does know what I mean, I was basically building separate tables for each race when I should have just been having them all in the same table and using a foreign key to relate them to the other table.
Yeah.
But I didn't know any better. I really didn't.
Wow.
And but it worked, which was the main takeaway.
You spun up a new table for every race.
Yeah, no, and it meant when he renamed the race, everything broke, or if there was a special character. Yeah, it was just nonsense, really. But that's how I thought about it. Turns out I was like one step away from doing it correctly.
This is like first year college, like right after high school.
Yeah, that was it. And so I didn't start in computer engineering. I started in general engineering, which had some computer modules, but it took a while to ramp up. After second year, I then specialized in computer engineering, where I learned eventually about databases and learned how wrong I was, 18 months prior. But yeah, that's kind of where it went. And, I eventually got some good internships. I interned at HubSpot as a kind of full stack, kind of predominantly front-end engineer on the notifications team. That was a great place. They gave you a lot of, hands-on experience, and a lot of responsibility. And, if anyone's used HubSpot, I designed the first version of the notification bar and the notification tray that everybody uses probably every day. It's still there, to their credit. It obviously wasn't too bad. And then I came back a year later after my master's and became a front end engineer for HubSpot. And that was kind of where I kind of started to hone my craft as a front end engineer.
And then tell me how you got into Wink, the dating app. What is that?
Yeah, so this was one of my ventures throughout college. So like I mentioned, Trinity has an incredible startup ecosystem for one reason or another. And they have this program called Launchbox, which basically funds students. It's effectively like what the earliest version of YC was. They give students a small salary to work on their ideas throughout the summer.
Oh, wow.
But it actually all started way before.
So Trinity gives you money, or credit?
Yeah, money. Yeah, real money. It's a real small, something like, it might be like €300 a week or something. But
it's enough as a student to say, okay, yeah, I'll just work on my little startup idea.
Exactly, and that's exactly the idea. So, but it actually all started the summer before that. So Wink was a dating app that the tagline was, it matched you with people and things to do, right? So it has a bizarre founding story. So I was at the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh, and I was at Skyscanner, the flight comparison website. I worked there for a summer in Edinburgh. That's where they're headquartered. And a friend of mine came over to visit, and he during the Fringe Festival, which is a comedy festival that happens for a month in Edinburgh, and we went to this ridiculous comedian's talk about how, I think he called it his Groupon journey. You're familiar with Groupon? Yeah,
of course.
The voucher buying e-commerce platform, I suppose. So he talked about how he would meet girls on something like Tinder, and he would say, hey, do you want to do a Groupon? And that would be their kind of opening line. And he would just go do like bowling with them or some sort of like pottery class with them.
Oh, that's smart.
And
that was his opener. That's like, hey, you want to go do one of these Groupon events, like bowling half price, or wow.
Yeah, exactly. So we
probably worked really well for him.
Hey,
he was getting a lot of dates.
It did. I think it ended in a happy ending. But yeah, that's what we started. We walked away from that, like what was ultimately a comedy show, with the beginnings of an idea about how you could turn the dating scene around by doing exactly that on a platform. And yeah, we a few months later that we had a prototype where you could match, like swipe on people, and you could swipe on things to do. And
these are the people I'm interested in, and these are the activities I'm interested in, and it's like kind of the matching those two things.
Yeah, so you'd only match with a person. You'd only be able to chat to a person once there was, you both liked each other, and once you had at least one thing to in common in terms of what you want to do, which was great because you then had an opening line to be like, hey, we have these three things that we basically like to do.
Yeah.
It didn't work out for a variety of reasons, but it was.
Well, it's more friction than a simple match, right?
A lot of friction.
Yeah.
It's also, dating apps are notoriously one of the hardest things to launch because you've got a two-sided marketplace, and this was in fact a three-sided marketplace because we were looking for buyers or for deals with these vendors who would kind of have these deals. So there was just a huge amount of reasons why it wasn't
two marketplaces instead of one marketplace. Yeah, that's tough.
Exactly.
Why I don't invest in consumer that much, because everybody knows about unicorn consumer companies because they're so rare, right? But there's hundreds of unicorn B2B SaaS enterprise companies you've never heard of.
Yeah, right.
That's funny. So tell me about the Dublin startup scene. So I mean, Trinity College seems to be kind of seeding it with this summer stipend to work on your startup idea. What else is going on there?
Yeah, there's some great things. So there's this startup venue called CHQ, but the startup loft or the startup area is called Dogpatch, and that's based not too far from Trinity. And they up to their credit, they provide a huge amount of value to the Irish startups ecosystem. So there's a program there for high school kids, and well, actually anyone between 18 and 21, to basically similar to the one I mentioned in Trinity, to work on ideas over the summer. That's called Patch. That's pretty new, but that in and of itself just fosters this environment of people wanting to build things, people wanting to work on things. They also recently, in this same place, they started an actual accelerator program called the NDRC, which is very similar to YC's previous deal. They give you €100,000 to work on, well, as a safe investment into your startup for like a 3-month program with demo day at the end. But it's much smaller. It's for like, I think they take about 8 startups per batch. So it's really hands-on experience. You get in touch with investors, you get in touch with mentors. It's really a great program. I didn't go through that myself, but I know a lot of people who have, and it's worked out really well for them. But the other side of it is, and beyond the kind of programs, is Dublin is a really unique space in the sense that almost every tech company's headquarters or European headquarters is based in Dublin, for tax reasons and for geopolitical reasons. But there's an incredible amount of computer engineering talent, and that's kind of the main reason. So wherever there's computer engineering talent, there's going to be people wanting to start ideas, wanting to start startups.
Right.
But then it's also a great place to hire. It's a competitive place to hire, but there's also an incredible talent pool.
Just a talent pool.
Despite
so does it all come back to, what do you think is the inception? Is it Trinity College promoting entrepreneurialism in the area, or is it the tax policy that promoted the big tech companies to open offices there that created the kind of critical mass?
It's one of the chicken and egg things. Yeah. I think it was probably originally the tax thing that promoted the international companies. Like Microsoft has been in Dublin for, I don't know, 20 odd years.
Yeah.
But then in the last 10 years, the things like Facebook, or now Meta, Twitter, Airbnb, HubSpot have huge offices here, as I know. All of the big tech companies have their EMEA headquarters here, and a very significant amount of them have engineering talent or engineering departments there, and they all have sales departments and support departments. So it kind of creates this, it gives people an insight into what working at a scale up or a startup is. And I guess it creates this incentive to go start your own,
Right.
No.
And is it the biggest tech scene in Europe? Are there bigger ones? Is London bigger? I hear things about Portugal right now.
Yeah, London's definitely quite big, but to me, it's kind of focused on finance and fintech.
Yeah.
I mean, just because London has 8 billion people in it, or 8 million people in it.
Yeah.
Dublin has like 1. So, it's going to have a big scene in and of itself. Berlin is a really big startup scene as well, probably again for just population reasons.
Yeah.
But Lisbon is, again, I think it's promoting more of like the nomad lifestyle, but also the startup founders, because it's a nice place to live.
Yeah.
It's much more affordable, and I think they're
Better
really
weather.
encouraging
Yeah.
people to come over. Yeah, I'm
Kind of like
certainly
the
considering it.
Miami. It's like the Miami of
Yeah,
Europe.
exactly.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. Now we're pretty lucky here in Dublin with the. I think if it wasn't for that, I mean, I don't know if there'd be any jobs in the computer science or in computer engineering.
Yeah.
It's a very small country otherwise.
So how do you see the next 5 to 10 years of web and app development kind of unfolding? This is one of my favorite future questions. Yeah, what do you see the future of SaaS and building apps and all that stuff?
Yeah, it's definitely an exciting time. The way I like to think about it is almost the evolution of like the website, right? So, before 2010, everybody was writing websites by scratch, and they weren't that interactive. But then things like Wix, Squarespace, Webflow came around by 2012, 2013. That was a defined category. Even if you listen to podcasts with Vlad from Webflow, he tried to start this several years earlier, 2 or 3 times. I think he's basically tried to start some version of Webflow. But it wasn't until the kind of technology and the market was ready in kind of 2012.
For the audience, what is Webflow?
Sorry, yeah, Webflow is a very powerful website builder. It kind of gives you high level buttons, and it's a no code platform for building websites. It's high level abstraction over plain old CSS and HTML, basically.
Kind of a WYSIWYG kind of editor, but very powerful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, by 2012, these WYSIWYG editors were
what you see is what you get
category. Yeah.
Sorry.
Exactly.
Just got to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about.
So many acronyms.
Yeah.
So I see the same type of thing happening for web apps and app development in and of itself. We're talking about the next phase. We can't use Web 3.0 because that's not what they are, but whatever we call that, web app 2.0, web app 3.0, the next phase are dynamic apps where there's personalization, there's authentication, where people can log in, they have their own accounts, and all of that is kind of handled in a very automated and very, almost commoditized way. I think that's going to be much more common, both in terms of products, but most importantly, at least from my perspective, is kind of the internal tooling side of things, where the exact look and feel of the app isn't as important compared to, say, the functionality, and then going further, as I've already mentioned, AI is just going to accelerate this so much. We've already seen we're able to go from idea to execution with kind of static websites in just a few minutes.
Right.
With that in the next few years, we're going to see that a lot more. I think every business is going to need some sort of custom CRM, some sort of custom tooling, and they'll be able to do that with no-code platforms and AI combined, and they'll be able to work much more efficiently than before.
Yeah, the way I've been characterizing this is, AI, software's eating the world, as Andreessen said, and then AI is eating software,
Absolutely.
generating more software, generating more SaaS. And so I think we're going to see, even more SaaS in the future than we have now. But then I think about kind of like, okay, after that, what does that look like? In 5 or 10 years, when anybody who can talk to a machine, which is pretty much anybody in the world, can create any software that they need on the fly in, like you said, like minutes. What does SaaS software look like at that point, right? Is it just this one big horizontal platform like Microsoft, and you just talk to the Microsoft Cortana or whatever, or ChatGPT, and you're just like, hey, I need a WYSIWYG that does this widget thing, and it just builds it for you. And you don't need software companies anymore, because you're like, yeah, I need to track my delivery drivers, they're delivering milk or what have you. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that.
That's a really interesting thing. I think one thing that doesn't solve for is, and doesn't help me whatsoever, is the kind of social aspect of it. You could ask an AI to write your own Twitter, but it would just be you tweeting to nobody. So you still need somebody in the middle to produce those kind of social platforms, I would guess.
Yeah.
Right. But then could you just build your own Riverside, for example,
right.
So that you have a Team Ignite Riverside that's very specific to what you need? Yeah, I guess I guess you could. At the moment, that's incredibly challenging. There's so much to it, but 5 years, I could
5,
see
10,
that
20 years, anything's possible, right? Like software that conforms to your needs. on the fly, built by AI. Exactly, like everybody has their own customized Gmail, their own customized Google Docs, their own customized all these platforms that kind of serve hundreds of millions, billions of people, become customized point solutions built by AI on the fly for you, personalized exactly to what you need, kind of like almost like an AI assistant, super intelligent, that is very quick, like a 100x engineer that can build anything as well, anything you need in in a matter of minutes or really seconds.
Yeah, but the assumption there is that we're still, using computers at all and meeting in person. Maybe it's all going to happen in VR, in the metaverse.
Yeah, maybe in the future it's like your podcast AI is talking to my podcast AI, and we're actually not even. It's just it's like a digital twin of myself hosting the podcast. That's funny.
Yeah, we see that. I think you talked about in one of your previous pods, right? Where it's like emails, automated emails, just emailing each other, right? Is that what it's going to be in the future?
I think so. Like I see I do a lot of MarTech and sales tech investing, and including one of our previous guests, a tool from Hyperbound, and I think in the future, really what all sales and marketing is doing is trying to uncover people who need your thing, right? Your solution. And if you can use AI to find the people that need the thing that you're selling, all of that happens more efficiently. And then you kind of layer in like, well, AI can also build it too, right? Because fundamentally what a business does is it builds things and sells things, right? And so maybe the definition of a business completely changes, right? When the supply of labor asymptotes to infinity or whatever, and the cost of that asymptotes to almost zero, maybe what it means to have a business kind of changes too, and we end up in this post-capitalist semi-utopian kind of super abundant place, which is really fascinating to think about.
It is, and I guess someone 50 years ago probably could have said the same thing if they saw the internet coming. It's like, well, these days you have a business, you need a shop front and a letterhead, but now people are drop shipping with a domain name or less than a domain name, a TikTok account.
Well, if you put yourself back like 30 years into the say early 90s, when the internet was just becoming a thing, and people were starting to invest in this and be like, oh my gosh, this is going to change everything. And it did change everything. It just took 20 years. And I think maybe that's kind of where we're at with AI. It's like, oh wow, this is this sparks of AGI, artificial general intelligent thing, is going to change everything. And it will, but it's going to take 10 to 20 years because there's sociological drift, social drift in our culture. There's cultural drag, I think, is how sociologists define it. It just takes a while for things to kind of get implemented and retooled, and people to be displaced and retrained. And
yeah, I think though the younger generations are probably in a better place to adopt, right? Because even with like what we're offering, there's a certain age limit where typically people who aren't kind of digital natives really struggle to adopt things like this. And I think even more so, AI, obviously because it's a chat interface, to its credit, the barrier to entry is super low.
Yeah.
When you're talking about kind of writing software and replacing software, it's going to take a long time before that's available to literally everybody. And that's the norm, right?
Yeah.
And we just, as we know, there's still people using spreadsheets and to run their business, and that's fine. And then there's still people using pen and paper, right? So just because the spreadsheet was invented 20 years ago doesn't mean everybody's adopted
That's true. Yeah, I see that a lot in pitch decks around, oh, we're going to take this, meat distribution company that's doing everything on paper invoices and bring them into the system, and like, wow, they could have been on a system 10, 20 years ago, or hey, they're on a system, but it's from the 90s and nobody's touched it since then. And I think about like how thankful I am. I was born in 1980, so I'm in my 40s now. But if I would have been born 10 years earlier, I think technology was already moving too quickly, maybe 10 or 20 years earlier. I see definitely boomers that are in their 60s and 70s really struggle to just keep up with the pace. But I think people
fast.
in my generation, kind of that millennial. I'm like early millennial, late Gen X. I almost said Gen Z. We're late Gen X. Like we've just kind of
I would have believed you.
lived in it, right? We just kind of lived in this cycle of, like every year or two something comes out that's better, and you just have to relearn everything every year or two because it's just constantly getting better and changing.
Yeah.
There's a book, Future Shock, right? That's what Future Shock is about. The
I
pace
haven't
of
read that. It's on
technological
my list.
change. Yeah, just it's just so fast. It's just like you just get shocked, right? I just watched a Star Trek episode where they encounter. I'm watching Next Generation with my kids. They never saw it, so it's like my favorite. And they encounter like an alien probe, and it turns out it's like a cryonics satellite from like the early 21st century, from our time, right? And these early 21st century like Americans are like, call my banker, I want to check on my accounts. They're like well, there is no money in the Federation.
Yeah.
It's just like future shock, right?
It's hard to imagine, right?
Yeah. Well, cool. Let's do a rapid fire. What's one book has profoundly impacted your career or life, or both?
Yeah, I actually don't read all that much, but I did recently listen to The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Yeah.
It's a pretty cliched answer, but it really helped put some of the stuff that I'm kind of moving from CTO to CEO into perspective, kind of allowing me to focus on the hard things.
That's a good book.
How to go about them.
Yeah, I listened to it as well in the car on my commute. I love that one. Dinner guests. If you could have dinner with 3 people, dead or alive, who would they be?
Yeah, this is a tough one, I'll be honest. I think the first one will be Dharmesh Shah from HubSpot. He's just, to me, he's incredible. He's a CTO, but he's so much more than that as well. And he's just like a product person at heart, and he's always tinkering. I aspire to be like that if I ever become half as successful as Dharmesh. I just would love to kind of keep tinkering. A few others, James Acaster, a random comedian from the UK, but I just think he'd be absolutely a delight to have at dinner. It would definitely add to I don't know if we'd even get along, but I know he'd be funny. And again, maybe cliched, but I think Paul Graham could be a great person to pick his brain. I think he doesn't speak. He speaks very intently. I think he has a lot of insights.
Great writing.
Great writing. Yeah,
just a deep thinker and
That's it.
Yeah, and he has interesting practical ways of putting things that make sense. And when you read it, you're like, oh this just makes sense.
Absolutely.
What's a hidden talent that you have nobody knows about?
Oof, I don't know about talents. I used to do a bit of DJing, which is actually I omitted that from that's why my original website was for my DJing business. But
nice.
I wouldn't say it's a talent anymore. But definitely not a lot of people know about it.
I push play, and then I pick the next song, and then I blend them. DJ.
It's harder than you think. You've got like 2 minutes to do that.
It's harder than it looks.
Yeah.
No, I know for when I try to DJ my own like house parties, right?
Yeah.
And I usually shut down the party because I throw on some obscure 90s hip hop, and everybody's just like starts rolling their eyes. They're like, all right.
That's it. You've got all that pressure. It's a tough gig.
Podcast. What's a podcast recommendation you have?
I'm addicted to Acquired. And their ACQ2. They're long form. I just stick them in when I'm running, and
how long are they?
I just learned so much. Though they can be anywhere from like 2 to 4 hours.
Ooh, like the Lex Friedman podcast, like just sit down.
Yeah,
we're gonna sit down and chat for like 3 or 4 hours about this topic.
Yeah, they tend to break them up though. So they did have one on one of the newspapers, the massive one. The name's completely escaping me. Which was like 3-hour shows. So they do go on.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know if I'd ever. I like the hour format for the Ignite podcast. I feel like that's the right amount of chatting. Yeah. I think 2 hours would be
it tends not to be chat. It's more informational, and they tend to weave a good story through it. So the time flies by.
I think the Joe Rogan podcast also is a couple hours, right? Like 2 or 3 hours per guest, right?
Yeah, I don't think I've made it through any of those.
That's what everybody says. It's like I've never made it through. I just kind of throw it on in the background, and if you had a time machine, where and when would you go?
Yeah, you kind of half brought this up earlier. I think it would. I mean, I was alive during this time, but I'd love to be like my age now during the dot-com boom, just to kind of be a part of it.
Yeah.
Obviously we're going through our own boom right now,
Right.
but
Yeah.
I think being like that early on the technology, and I don't know if I would have seen it coming, but maybe to just be there would have been interesting. I'm not super interested in like way beyond there. I don't care about. I don't think about the Romans.
Right. Yeah. Plus, they'd probably kill you. You'd go back there, and they would they would
right.
see you, and you would look weird, and you would talk weird, and they'd just be like, "Infidel, barbarian, like kill him."
Yeah, exactly. No, thank you.
What about in the future? Like, if you could go into the future,
you're thinking past,
like future.
Yeah.
Like, at what point in the future development of humanity would you want to go, like, travel to the point in time? I think for me, like, travel to the point in time where we make alien contact and what that's like.
Yeah. I mean,
if we haven't already, of course, some people.
I'd be super curious to see what, like, even like 100 years out is like.
Yeah.
Not too far.
Or what, like, 100 years after the first alien contact looks like. What is our society? Are we like just
hopefully
kind of grab driving? I'm playing Starfield right now. Are we driving all over the universe to different stars and systems and stuff? That'd be really cool to see. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I think the one that comes to mind is it's not so much advice, but in the introductory call that we had with our YC group, Dalton Caldwell, our group partner, there was about 100 startups on the call, maybe a little less, maybe 100 founders. But he kind of stood there and said 6 of us would be unicorns. So again, not advice, just a statement. But that
that's 6%. That's the historical rate of unicorns. For YC.
Standing there and kind of saying 6% of the people on this call.
Yeah, 1 out of 20.
Yeah, it's it says 2 things. It says, 1, you should strive to become a unicorn if you're here, and more importantly, it's within your reach. But then also 94% of you will not become unicorns, and you need to make sure you're in that 6%, right? So it was kind of like you have all of the potential, but only if you play your cards right. And I think it just set the tone really right. And I'd like to think we're on that course.
Probably what they say to like astronauts. Astronaut training camp is like only 6% of you will actually go into space.
Yeah, right. Brutal. Yeah, I say that being like, geez, wouldn't do that. Here I am.
Yeah, it was almost like a call to action more than advice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, not really advice, but that's what stood out when I think about that.
That's interesting. Any current obsessions, hobbies, TV, movie?
Yeah, I run a lot. That's kind of one thing that keeps me sane. I'd like to think it's not an obsession.
What is that about? Like, I'm not a runner. Like I have to trick myself into running. I play basketball, and that's when I run.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I'm not a runner.
For me,
I like to weight train.
I really, yeah, I do that as well. But running kind of started becoming enjoyable when I stopped trying to run fast, and I just started to run for time. So I'll run for like an hour, no problem, or longer.
Yeah, like a slow 10, 12 pace mile.
Exactly. Yeah, I love it. And it's just, I get like an hour and a bit of a podcast in. And, it's the only time I leave my phone away.
Just a little jog.
Like, rare.
Like a little jog for an hour.
Exactly.
It's like meditative.
No, it's great. Yeah, pretty much. I don't know where I'd be without it, to be honest.
That's interesting. Yeah, clears the mind.
It's the only thing that works.
Well, last thing, plug how potential customers can get in touch with NoLoco.
Of course, yeah. So you can find us on NoLoco.io or just search for NoLoco. It's NoLoco. We're also on Twitter at NoLocoHQ. But yeah, if you want to reach out to me as well, it's Darragh McKay on Twitter or Darragh at NoLoco.io. Happy to answer any questions about building apps for you and your team with no code.
Well, this was an amazing conversation. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Brian. Really appreciate being here.
Likewise.
Okay.